Tov. Today's Daf Yomi is Bava Kamma Mem Ches. We're going to start on the bottom of Mem Zayin on the base, 6 lines from the bottom. Today's Daf Yomi is dedicated for Yeshua, for Am Yisrael, for Hatzalah, for the Shvuyim, for Shmira on the Chayalim. Ibayu Eichi Dekive Olay Niturusa Mahu. So let's say there's Ruvain has an ox and Shimon has a courtyard, and Shimon says to Ruvain, yeah, you could bring your ox into my courtyard and I'll watch it. But does he accept upon himself to nafshehu to keep away? Or dilma feeling to ruso da alma keep away? Is he accepting upon himself, is Shimon accepting upon himself, I'm not going to damage your ox? Or is he saying, I'm going to make sure that nobody anywhere in the world damages your ox? Gemara says, Tashma, we have a brayso which tells us that Tani Rav Yehuda bar Simon ben Nizikin debei Karna, because Rav Yehuda bar Simon taught in the Nizikin debei Karna. There used to be that our tractate Bava Kamma, and then the next one Bamitzia Bava Basra, were not called that. They were called Nizikins, Mesechta de Nizikin. So that we see that Rav Yehuda bar Simon, he has a brayso in the Nizikin that was taught in the Academy of Karna. He says the following: Hichnis perosa v'chatzar ba'abayis shelo b'rashus. Let's say Reuben brings his food into Shimon's courtyard without permission. Uba'ashor mimakom ha'acher, and an ox comes along from another place. The achon, and the ox coming along from the other place eats the fruits, meaning to say an ox, let's say Levi's ox comes along and eats Reuven's fruits, pater. He's exempt. But if Reuven had permission to bring them in, chayev, he's responsible. So Gemara says, the Gemara, man pater man chayev, when the Bryce here says he's exempt and he's liable, who are we referring to? Who's the one who's exempt? Who's the one who's liable? Lav pater bal chatzar v'chayev bal chatzar. Aren't we saying that if he had permission, the owner of the courtyard is liable, and if he didn't have permission, the owner of the courtyard is exempt, and is telling us that when a person says you can come in, he's protecting you from everywhere, from damage from beyond him. Gemara says, no, that's not what it means. Lo pater bal hashor v'chayev bal hashor. It means no, that Levi, the third party, brought in his ox. He's the one who's going to be exempt if you brought it in without permission, and he's the one who's liable if you brought it in with permission. That's what we're talking about. So Gemara says, wait, why do we care? Levi has nothing to do with Shimon's courtyard. Ibal Ashor, on top of 48a, my bereshus and my shalom bereshus. If we're referring to the third party, Levi being the one who's responsible or guilty, why do we care if he has permission or if he doesn't have permission? My bereshus, my shalom bereshus ika. So Amri, the Gemara says, no. Bereshus, if Reuven had permission to go into Shimon's courtyard with his fruits, then when Levi eats his produce, that's considered, Levi's ox is considered tooth, he's eating, in the domain of the Nizak, because since Reuven had permission, it's like his domain. And we say, V'shein b'rshus hanizak chayeves, and if your animal comes into my courtyard and eats my food, you're responsible. So therefore, Levi would be responsible if Reuven had permission. But Shelo b'rshus, if Reuven goes into Shimon's courtyard without permission and Levi's animal eats it, Shein b'rshus harabim, that's like tooth eating in public. Shein b'rshus harabim petura, and therefore, if you have tooth in public, your animal's allowed to eat in public, you'd be exempt. So Gemara does not answer the question yet. Tashma hichnis shoro l'chatzar ba'abayis shelo b'rshus. Let's say Reuven brings his ox into Shimon's courtyard without any permission. And Levi's ox comes in and gores him, vinagcho, and gores Reuven's ox in Shimon's courtyard, pater. And we say he is pater. But if Reuven had permission to go in, then we're going to say that Levi is, and Levi gores him, chayev, he's liable. And again, man pater, man chayev. When we say pater and chayev here, who are we referring to? Aren't we saying of pater bal chatzar v'chayev bal chatzar? Aren't we saying the owner of the courtyard is exempt or liable? And doesn't this prove that the owner is responsible for all damages, not just ones that he inflicts? Gemara says, no, that's not what we're saying. Well, Pater Balashor, V'chiev Balashor. We're saying that Levi, the third party, if Reuven had permission, he's exempt. And Shimon, and if he didn't have permission, if Reuven had permission, then Levi is exempt. If Reuven did not have permission, Levi is exempt. And if Reuven had permission, Levi is liable. So the Gemara says, but this is not the same case as before, because tooth in the public domain, Levi would be you're allowed to, your animal's allowed to eat, so you're exempt. But goring in the public domain, you're responsible. So how would we explain this? So the Gemara says, well, how would we say that if he comes in with permission or without permission? What does it have to do with Levi? So the Gemara says, no, Amri Hamani Rabbi Tarfoni. No, this price, it goes according to the position of Rabbi Tarfon, who says, Mishuna Karen Bechatzar Anizek Nezek Shalim Mishalim. So Mishuna, unusual goring, that's i.e. tam. If an animal will gore, that's not usual. And if he gores in the domain of the Nizak, and that's if Reuven has permission to go in, he pays full damages. Nezek Shalim Mishalim. And then when it says Chayev, it means if he had permission, if Reuven had permission to go in, Levi has to pay him full damages. Because like the domain of the Nizak. Verishus, Havulei Karin B'chatzar Nizak. So if it was his, if he had permission, it would be goring in the domain of the Nizak, Umasham Nezek Shalim. And Levi would pay full damages. Shalom Bereshus, if Reuven had no permission, Havulei Karin Bereshus Harabim, and it would be goring in public. He'd pay half damages. When it says Potter, it means he's exempt from full damages, but he would still have to pay half damages. Gemara tells us a story now. Don't get too excited. It's not a really, like a fun story. It's just a regular story. There's a woman that went up to bake in a house. Asa Barcha Demari, the master's goat came along, and the goat ate the dough of the woman. And Chavel, the goat, was not supposed to be eating this dough because it was bad for the dough. It was bad for the goat, and the goat overheated, umis, and the dog died. So Chiva, not the dog, the goat died. So Chiva.
The goats are notorious. They will eat a Coke can.
Right. So that's.
They will just chew it and eat it.
They ate it. The goat ate it, even though it was dangerous. And so Chiva Rava was Shumei Dmei Barucha. So Rava said to the woman, the baker, you have to pay for this goat. So Gemara says, but wait 1 second. Yesterday we said a case of Rav, that if you bring your food into if Reuven brings his food into Shimon's courtyard, and Shimon's animal eats Reuven's food and dies, Reuven can say to him, I don't have to pay you because you should have told your animal not to eat. So there's this teaching of Rava, Lema Pligia de Rav. Does it argue with Rav? The Amar Rav, because Rav taught Avila Shlo Tochal. You could say you should have told your animal not to eat my food. Here too, the woman could have told the owner of the goat, you should have told your goat not to eat my dough. Amri, so Rava says no. It's not the same case. Hasam Shalo Bereshus. There, when Rav gave his law, it's talking about a case where Reuben brings his food into Shimon's courtyard without permission. So lo kibo tirusa, since he didn't have permission, he was actually in a stronger position because he was saying, I never accepted upon myself to watch your animal. But here this woman went in with permission, kibo tirusa. She accepted upon herself permission. Mara says, wait 1 second. There's a coda to the story, so we're not done with the story yet. But the Gemara first challenges this. What are you talking about? One time a woman, why is this different from the case of a woman who comes to a courtyard to grind the wheat without permission, and the animal, the owner of the courtyard eats it, Pater. If the owner eats her food, he's exempt. Vim huska, and if the owner is damaged by her food, if the owner's animal is damaged, chayeves, then we're going to say that she is responsible. That's where she comes in without permission, but if she had permission, she'd be Potter, she'd be exempt. So why in this case, what's the distinction between the two cases? And Gemara says, okay, the distinction is as follows. L'tchon chitim, when she comes in to grind wheat, keeping the low bites in the usa, she doesn't need any modesty. It's not an immodest thing to grind wheat. Lo ba'im misalki marvasa techotzer nafshayu va'alei didai ramini turusa. Since it's not immodest, she doesn't need privacy. Then the master of the courtyard, the owner of the courtyard, is not going to have to leave, and so therefore he can watch his animal. So if she comes in with permission, we're going to say that she's exempt because the master could have watched the animal. But this case of baking is fundamentally different. When a woman bakes, she uncovers parts of her hands and her arms, and they were very modest about that. So when it comes to baking, keeping the bai heats niusa, since she requires modesty for the baking, marvasa the chatzar misalki nafshayel, the owner of the courtyard, departs. And therefore, Helkach Allah Dida Ramya Nitirusa. Implicitly, she's the one who's responsible to make sure the animal doesn't eat from her food. And so therefore, if the animal gets sick, she's the one who's responsible. Now we have the next case and the Mishnah, which says, let's say you bring your ox into the courtyard of the owner. So Amarava Hechne Shoro Chater Balabaya Shalom Bereshus. So Rava says, let's say Reuven brings his ox into Shimon's courtyard without any permission. And as a consequence, if Reuven brings his ox into Shimon's courtyard without permission, and Reuven's ox digs wells and ditches, then Baal Shor Chayev, then clearly Reuven is responsible. He's the owner of the ox. He's responsible. He's responsible for the damage he did to the courtyard. There's no question about that. But here's the Chiddush: Baal Chotzer Chayev b'nizkei abor. If somebody else's animal then falls into that pit and dies, the owner of the courtyard is responsible for the damages of the pit. And Alfagav da Amar Mar ki yichre ishbor v'lo shorbor, even though the pasuk says when a man digs a pit, which means when a man and not an ox. But in this case, since in this case the owner of the field should have filled in the pit and he didn't do it, dummy. It's like he dug it himself and therefore he's responsible. Next case, let's say Reuven brings his ox into Shimon's courtyard without permission. And Reuven's ox damages Shimon. Oh, Balabayas huzakbo. Or the Balabayas slips on it, then we're going to say, or he's damaged by Chayev, he's going to be responsible. If he damages the Balabayas, or the Balabayas himself is damaged by it, we're going to say that the owner of the ox is responsible. But Ravatz, if the ox just squatted, pater, then the owner of the ox is exempt. The Gemara says, what? Mishum de Ravatz pater? The Gemara says, do you think because he just squatted, then he's exempt? What is this, squatting, get out of jail free card? You're not responsible if your animal squats? So what are we talking about here? So says Rav Papa, let me explain it. My Ravatz, what does it mean? Shehir bits kulalim. It means he dropped his excrement. V'natfu kelav shel balabayis. And then when he did that, he ruined the clothing of the owner of the courtyard. The excrement is considered to be classified as a pit. And so since the owner got stuck on the feces, it's like he got stuck on a pit and the clothing got ruined. But the law is that clothing, that you're not responsible for kalim from a pit. You're only responsible for an animal or a person that's damaged, but not the utensil. Gemara says, well, Hani Shmuel, that only works according to Shmuel, to Amar Kol Takala Borhu, who says that if you have a hazard in public, we classify it as a pit. And Rav da Amar Rav says, no, it's only classified as a pit once you declare it ownerless. But until you declare it ownerless, it's called an ox. Ma'iko and Maimer. According to Rav, why would you not be responsible for the squatting? So the Gemara says, Amri stam go'olam afkurim afkir. No, in general, as a basic rule, when the animal evacuates its body, when the animal produces waste, you declare that ownerless as a general rule. Amarava, next case, nichnas l'chatzar balabayis shelo b'rishus. Let's say a person enters into, Reuven enters into Shimon's courtyard without permission. V'hizik is balabayis, balabayis huzakbo chayiv. And he damages the balabayis, so the balabayis slips on it. He is going to be, Reuven is exempt. But hiziku balabayis pater. But if the balabayis damages Reuven, who entered into his courtyard without permission, he's going to be exempt. The balabayis is exempt. So Amar Rav Papa, i.e. Shimon is exempt. And Rav Papa says, Lo Amrin el Delava Yadebe. That when do we say that the balabayis is exempt? When he doesn't know that Reuven is there. Avalava Yadebe. But if he knows that he's there, he's Ziko balabayis chayiv. If the owner of the courtyard damages Reuven, even though he knows Reuven is there, the owner is responsible. So this is against the laws of Florida. My time. Yeah, you have the right to kick me out, but la zuke, that doesn't give you the right to damage me. La suke, you don't have the right to damage me. Meaning to say, so even though I was in your courtyard without permission, you're responsible for the damages you do to me. So they follow their logic that Rava and the name of Rav Papa, both of them said, we're on the top of Memches on the base. Shneim bereshus or shneim below shelo bereshus. Let's say there are two people who are walking in the public domain or in a courtyard, or he gave him permission to come in. Shneim bereshus or shneim shelo bereshus. Ziku zetzeh chayav, and if they damage each other, they're responsible. Excuse me. Husku zebazeh Peturin, but if they slipped on each other, if one slipped on the other, they're exempt. That because it wasn't negligence, that the guy wasn't careful. But time addition the reason is both of them had permission or both of them didn't have permission. But if one of them had permission and the other one didn't, the one who had permission is exempt. The one who doesn't have permission is liable because he should have been careful. He should have been careful. And so this case here is similar to the teaching of Rava and Rav Papa, where if you go into the courtyard of the Baal Bayis without permission, then the one who comes in is responsible for the damages to the Baal Bayis, and the Baal Bayis is exempt from the damages of the one who comes in. So, okay. Nafal, next case. Nafal abor v'hivish meimav chayiv. If the ox falls into the pit and he ruins the water in the well, then he's responsible. Amarava, when do we say that the owner of the ox is responsible for the well? Well, that's only where he damaged it at the moment that he fell. But if the water became damaged after it fell, potter, he's going to be exempt. The owner of the ox. My time, I have a shore bore. We're going to classify the ox as a hazard, as a pit. Umayim kalim, and the water will classify as a utensil. And we never say that a pit is you're responsible for the utensils. And so therefore, in this case, you would only be responsible if it got damaged when it fell in, not if it was afterwards. Gemara says, Hani Shmuel. That only works according to Shmuel. It says, Kol takal barhu. It says, any hazard is a pit. El Rav Rav says it's only a pit once you declare it ownerless. Ma'iko Maimer. Isn't this an ox? In which case you should be responsible for the water. El Yitmar Achi Yitmar. So how do we teach this law? When do we say this? That you're responsible for the water when the ox damaged it with its body. But if the ox damaged it with its smell, if he damaged the water by smelling so bad, he's going to be exempt. My timer, kurama ba'almahu. It's indirect. The smell is indirect. Grama ba'alma l'machayev, and for an indirect damage, you're not responsible. Grama and Nezikin, indirect damages for Nezikin, you're not going to be responsible. Okay, so then the Gemara says, then the next case was, let's say the father or the son were already inside the well, and the ox fell in it and killed them. Then the owner of the ox has to pay the ransom. Vamai, why does he have to pay ransom? Clearly, oxen don't go around falling into wells in order to kill people, so it's unusual. So he's considered a tam, it's unusual. And a tam does not pay the ransom penalty. So the Gemara says, no, this is the case for this, what this ox actually does. Amarav b'muad lipo b'nei adam b'boros. No, that's what this ox does. It's not the first time he's fallen on a person by falling into the well and killing him. That's what we're talking about. That's what we're talking about. Well, the Gemara says, well, then the ox should have been killed. Because if the ox kills, even though it's a tam, it's put to death, even though it doesn't pay the ransom. So Amar Rav Yosef, no, the chaza yeruka, no, it was trying to eat there. It saw some green, so it was going to eat there. And so therefore it's shane. And if the ox kills without intent, we don't put it to death. But if it kills 3 times, then we're going to say it's a mu'ah to act like this, and it would have to pay the ransom. Shmuel Amar, Shmuel gives a different answer. Harmani Rav Yossi Aglili. This is the position of Rav Yossi Aglili, who says, Tam Mishalim Chatzi Kofer, that even though it's a tam, it pays half ransom. Ula says, no, Amar Rabbi Yossi Aglili. The Amar Rabbi Tarfon, he says, this is Rabbi Yossi Aglili, but he holds like Rabbi Tarfon in this case, who says, Karen b'chatzar nizak, if you gore in the domain of the nizak, nezek shalom misham, you pay full damages. So therefore, hachinami kofer shalom mishalim. Therefore, here, since it's the domain of the nizak, he's paying full damages. So the Gemara says, well, Bishlam Ula makes sense according to Ula. Hainu dikatani haya avivo b'no socho. That's why it says specifically his father or son is in it, because it's considered to be his domain. Shmuel, ma'yaya avivo b'no, afilu acharnami. Shmuel, why does it say specifically the father or the son are in it? Since it could be anybody, because he's saying it's a tam, why does it have to say specifically in his domain? So the Gemara explains, Orcha the Milsa Katani. No, Shmuel is just saying the Bryce is just, the Mishnah is just talking in the manner of the way people speak, like Divra Torah Kulashem B'nei Adam. Now we have the next case, Vim Hichnes Pershos Baal Chatzer Chayev, that if you bring the item if Reuven brings the item into Shimon's domain with Shimon's permission, then Shimon is responsible. But Rebbe says in our Mishnah that Shmuel is that the owner of the courtyard is only responsible unless he accepted explicitly upon himself to watch the item. So Gemara says, Itmar Rav Amar Hilchos like Tanakama. The law is like the Tanakama that the owner of the courtyard is responsible even implicitly. Shmuel Amar Hilchos like Rebbe, that the law is like Rebbe, that the owner of the courtyard is only responsible when he's explicit in his responsibility to watch it. Tana Rabbanan, we have a brayso. It says, Kenos Shorcha, bring your ox into my domain, Vishamro, and you guard it. Hizik, and then the ox is damaged, Chayev, then he's responsible. Huzak, if it's damaged, Patur. Kenos Shorcha, you bring your ox in Vaniesh Mereno, and I will watch it. Huzak, Chayev, Hizik, Patur. Then if the animal is damaged, he's responsible, the owner of the courtyard, and if the animal does damages, then the owner of the ox is potter, is exempt. But hagufa kasha, but this is an internal contradiction in this brayso. First case, it says Amras Kenot Shorchava Shamro. It says bring in your ox and you guard it. He's a chayev who's a potter. It says if Reuven's ox is damaged there, or if it's damaged, Shimon's exempt, or Reuven is responsible. Time of Amroy Shamro, because he says explicitly you watch it. The chayev balashor, therefore the owner of the ox is responsible. Upater Baal Chatzer, and the owner of the courtyard is exempt. Hastama, but if we would just say nothing, we would say Chayev Baal Chatzer, Upater Baal Ashor. We would say the owner of the courtyard is responsible. To this Stama Mekabel in the Turusa, because as a baseline he accepts upon himself to watch it, and that's like the Rabbanon. But Ema Seifa, but the next clause it says Keno Shorcha Vaniyesh Moreno. bring in your ox and I'll watch it. Who's a chayav? He's a potter. And then we say from that case that he says, bring in your watch and I'll watch it. And he's exempt. Bring in your ox and watch it. Time of the Amroi Vaniyesh Merena. Why is he exempt? Because he says explicitly, I'll watch it. Therefore, who the mechayev bal chatzor pater bal ashor. That's why the owner of the courtyard is liable, and the owner of the ox is exempt. Hastama, but as a baseline, we would say chayev bal ashor. The owner of the ox is exempt. Pater bal chatzor. The owner of the ox is liable, and the owner of the ox is exempt. Because as a baseline, he doesn't accept upon himself to watch it. So that, according to this, the Seifa, Asan Rebbe. The Seifa follows Rebbe, who says, the Seifa of the Mishnah implies like Rebbe, that he has to be explicit in watching it. Reish Rabbanim is Seifa Rebbe. Would you really say that the first clause is like the Rabbanim and the second clause is like Rebbe? Amar Rebbe Lazar, so that's what Rebbe Lazar says. Tavra, Misha Shana Zil, Shana Zil. Yeah, we have to say the two separate opinions. No way to make synthesize the whole brisa. Rava says no cool Rabbanan. The whole thing is Rabbanan who says that if the Baal Bayis says come in, he's implicitly saying I'm going to be responsible. I did the nas of Reisha Shamra, because in the first clause he says you watch it. To say I'm not responsible, Tony safe of Aniyashmaran. It just uses this language which is inexact in the concluding clause. Whereas Rav Papa says, cool Rebbe, the whole thing is Rebbe who says you need to be explicit. The several like Rebbe Tarfon, and he also like Rebbe Tarfon who says, Karen, B'chatzar Nizak, that if you gore in the domain of the Nizak, if Reuven gores in Shimon's domain, Nezek Shalim Mishalim, he pays full damages. Hilkoch Amroe Shamro. So therefore, if Shimon says to Reuven, you guard your ox, he's not giving him any space. And so therefore it's scoring in the domain of the Nizak. The Karen B'chatzar Nizak, Shalim Nezek Shalim, you pay full damages. But if he didn't say to him to guard it, it's like he's giving him space in the courtyard. And so therefore it's like the domain of the partner is the Karen B'chatzar Shutfin in a Mashal Nezek. He pays only half damage. Okay, so that's how we conclude this beautiful Gemara. It's like a jigsaw puzzle where everything fits perfectly. We'll stop the recording here, but we can have a few minutes to go on a little bit more.